Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 377, or episode 12 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one 17 Years Later.
Oh.
In this episode, we begin our journey through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta, anything in the way of a shadowy past that you'd like to confess before all our listeners?
Oh. Oh.
No pressure or anything.
Shadowy past. Yeah.
No is an acceptable answer.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go with no.
I expected it to be a much quicker no, but you seem to be really trying to find something shadowy to
I
confess.
kind of was, because,
everyone.
I felt maybe it would, enhance our ratings a little bit, Some, I don't know, it's just something a little juicy, but I got nothing.
Got nothing?
I got nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all right. I'm okay with that.
I thought maybe you would be.
Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R., KG, Melkor27, SaberSystems, and Jeremy D. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in June of 2024, Richard B.W., Teresa C., and James L. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Appreciate you. In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we'll begin exploring the shadow of the past by finding out what Frodo is up to as the lone master of Bag End and what is going on in the wider world beyond the borders of the Shire. This section begins at the beginning of Book 1, Chapter 2, with the words, "The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days," and ends with, "But they had no name." So let's talk a little bit about the timeline here, because as you remember, I am calling this 17 years later. This episode's 17 years later. And that's because in this chapter, we jump from the year 3001 of the Third Age to the year 3018 of the Third Age. So for those doing math, that's 17 years. 17 years. You don't get this sense when you watch Jackson's films. But between Bilbo's birthday party and his departure, and then Frodo learning from Gandalf really about all the details concerning the ring, right? All of its dangers, and deciding to go on this journey to Rivendell. 17 years elapse. 17 years actually elapse. To be sure, there doesn't seem to have been a lot of action going on in the Shire during those years, aside from Frodo's regular commemoration of Bilbo on his birthday and Gandalf's somewhat infrequent visits to check in on Frodo. While an examination of the timeline will tell us of events elsewhere, we'll keep things focused on the story at hand for now. So just be aware that we are jumping from 3001 to 3018, or 1401 in the Shire Reckoning to 1418 in the Shire Reckoning. So
there's that 1600 years there that we discussed
on our MATHOMS episode.
Yep.
That's right. All right, so let's start off the beginning of this chapter here. So this portion of this chapter is for the most part expository. We're told about what Frodo was up to as the master of Bag End from the age of 33 to the age of 50. The first thing we learn, rumors about Bilbo's disappearance and fate continued for a long time after his disappearance. Rumors included accidental death by drowning due to madness, and over time, as is wont to happen, Bilbo kind of develops into this legendary figure, Mad Baggins, right, in the Shire. Old Mad Baggins running off for who knows where, right? And he probably drowned. Right? He probably drowned in a lake.
Probably, because we know hobbits can't swim.
That's right.
Yep.
Many think Gandalf had something to do with Bilbo's disappearance and possible death, and so he was very much viewed with suspicion. And Frodo refuses to mourn and gives a birthday feast for Bilbo every year. So I thought that was kind of touching,
That
right?
is very touching.
Yeah. Frodo decides that he's confident Bilbo is still alive, even though Frodo doesn't see him during this period either. And so he decides he's going to throw a birthday party for Bilbo every year.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's really a good way to keep his memory alive.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So does that mean if I pass away before you, or if I go off on a long journey and you don't know where I am, you're going to throw a birthday party for me?
No, because I know you hate parties.
Oh, Well.
So that wouldn't be a good way to honor your memory.
Well, what would be then? What are you gonna do on my birthday every year? I mean, I would like for a party to be thrown in my honor. I'm not saying that
in
I
your
would.
honor. Oh, you would
I
probably
just meant
like
not
it
want
because
to
you wouldn't have to
participate.
be there. All right, then yes, I will. I
Okay.
will throw you a party.
Right.
But
You heard it here first,
I
everybody.
would rather that not be necessary.
I know. I didn't mean to make it morbid. Or like I'll just going off on some kind of journey like Bilbo
If you're going
does.
off on a journey, you better take me with you.
Oh well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you probably won't want to throw a party for me if I don't take you with me.
Actually, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be a Curse John's name party. That's
Right.
what it would be.
Right. Yeah, just a couple of other notes about these first 4 paragraphs here. It says he begins to carry on Bilbo's reputation for oddity. So Frodo kind of picks up Bilbo's reputation where it left off in a lot of ways, which I think is fun. It's fun to consider Frodo as kind of carrying on all of the things we love about Bilbo, even after Bilbo's disappearance in the Shire.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
About that 100-weight feast?
Uh-huh.
So that's what he called the party that he threw on Bilbo's birthday every
Mm-hmm.
year was 100-weight feast. What does that mean? Because I actually read this part twice. Because I was like, because then it goes on to say, but that was short of the mark. For 20 guests were invited, and there were several meals at which it snowed food and rained drink, as hobbits say.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, let's look it up because I did not think to look that up. So let's see what the old
Because I feel like weight
Google
can be
machine has to
used
say about
for
it.
a different. Yeah, it could be used in
let's
different
see.
ways.
Called it. He refused to go. This is from wordreference.com. I can't. So assuming that the Shire uses the same units as Tolkien himself would have done, 100 weight is about 50 kilograms. Saying that this was short of the mark in this context means that 50 kilograms is an underestimate of what was consumed at the feast. So there you go.
Oh,
So
okay.
100 weight would have been like 100 kilograms or 112 pounds. So there must have been much more food than that. So that the 100 weight appears to be the estimation of how much food and drink were consumed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Not how much weight everybody puts on.
Well, there's that
being
too,
at the
but
party.
hopefully they didn't each put on 100
Hopefully.
pounds or
Yeah.
100,
Okay.
especially
Okay.
100 kilograms. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. I feel much better now.
Yeah. Good question. I had not written that down to look that up, but I'm glad we did look it up.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah.
I feel very enlightened.
Yeah. So once again, Frodo carrying on these birthday parties for Bilbo every year after Bilbo's disappearance in the years between 3001 and 3018. Paragraph 5. Let's read this little passage here from paragraph 5. Oops. All right. He lived alone as Bilbo had done, but he had a good many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who had as children been fond of Bilbo and often in and out of Bag End. Folko Boffin and Fredegar Bolger were 2 of these, but his closest friends were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. Frodo went tramping over the Shire with them, but more often he wandered by himself, and to the amazement of sensible folk, he was sometimes seen far from home walking in the hills and woods under the starlight. Merry and Pippin suspected that he visited the elves at times, as Bilbo had done. Move this over here. We learn about four additional Hobbit figures here: Folko Boffin, Fredegar Bolger. I think it's Bolger. It might be Bolger. Peregrine Took, and Meriadoc Brandybuck, of course, who we know as Pippin and Merry. Sam is not mentioned yet. He will be mentioned in the next section. And he's kind of different because he's not exactly a friend in the same way that they are. And that's an interesting distinction when it comes to Sam here. So, but as far as ages go, it's mentioned that these are like younger hobbits, right? So the ages we're talking about, Folko is 10 years younger than Frodo. And so in 3018, he would be 40 years old. Fredegar is 38 years old, so he's 12 years younger than Bilbo. He would be 38 in 3018. Pippin is 28 years old, so he's the baby of the bunch. Not really surprising given what we know about Pippin. He's 28 years old in 3018, and Merry is 36 years old. Of course, Frodo is 50 years old in the year 3018. So Frodo's 50, And if we just think about Merry and Pippin, 36 and 28. So, they're quite a bit
Wow,
younger.
they are
quite a bit younger
younger.
than Frodo is.
I feel like that's not portrayed very well in the movies. You get the sense that they're very much the same age.
Yeah, they seem to be very much peers in the movies.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think they all kind of grew up like sort of captivated by Bilbo, and that may be the uniting thread for all of them. And remember, hobbits don't come of age until much later than like human beings. So like a hobbit's youth is kind of considered until they're about, I think, 33 years old. Gotcha. Right. So, and I think even at our age now, I mean, I would say we have friends that are, several years older than us and several years younger than us.
That's
right.
True.
When you start to reach your adult years, you oftentimes do have friends that are, maybe not your exact age.
That's part of kind of the thing with like the middle part of middle age, right? Is you're kind of in the middle. So you have friends that are older and friends that are younger.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to look up this whole thing, tramping about the Shire. It's one of these words, I kind of assume I know what it meant. And, I was pretty accurate as far as what it meant, but there were some different definitions. Just wanted to clarify what tramping means, right? Because tramp can have kind of bad connotations to it, like the idea of a tramp, right? But in this context, it essentially means the recreational activity of going for long distance walks in rough country. Apparently, that's
like hiking.
That's a way that's a definition in New Zealand in particular. And then, it's I think it can also mean like, to kind of walk heavily, like to tramp on something or stamp, tramping and stamping. But I think in general, what is meant here is just this idea of like going for a walk kind of, over long distances, right? Just kind of out in the wilderness. So
what is it? I'm sorry. What is it? How is this word used to describe Frodo's activity?
That's right.
Shire?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it says, Frodo went tramping over the Shire with them, meaning Merry.
Oh, gotcha.
Merry, Pippin, Frediger, who will come to know as Fatty, and Folco. So Folco, Fatty, Pippin, and Merry. He would go kind of tramping around with them.
Okay.
One assumes that Sam was not able to be part of this because Sam was too busy being a gardener.
Yeah.
Right, probably
working for a living.
Yep.
Right? Yep.
The class distinctions here will become much more interesting, as we kind of continue along, right?
Yeah.
So all of those folks seem to have been from kind of well-off backgrounds, and but whereas Sam is, coming from a more working class background.
Yes, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. But interestingly enough, he also wanders about by himself, and Merry and Pippin suspect he is visiting elves when he goes wandering about by himself.
Which is not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, he seems, he seems to know elves from his time as a, from his association with Bilbo, obviously. So it doesn't seem too surprising.
Yeah, it's really kind of setting Frodo up here, I think, as one that enjoys adventure, one that likes kind of exploring and, just going like places that he hasn't seen before.
Yeah, for sure. Paragraphs 6 through 8, we learn a little bit more in terms of Frodo, about Frodo when he's by himself during this period. He shows signs of preservation as he gets closer to 50. People think it queer. Is this the ring effect? I last episode, in our mailbag episode, I coined the term RRE, radioactive ring effect. So is this preservation just, from him having the ring around? Was he using it? We don't have any indication here that he was using it. Gandalf had warned him against using it.
Yeah.
But is it possible it's just having this radioactive sort of effect on him, right? Yeah. It's preserving his life because he is the possessor of it.
Right.
At this point.
So even if he's not using it,
yeah, just
having it in his dwelling place,
yeah,
could be having an effect on him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're also given this sense. I think we got it from the last passage we read, but also from this passage I'm about to read, of what I'd call Frodo's growing wanderlust, which is one of my favorite words. I just love the word wanderlust, right?
I do too.
It says, "For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future. But half unknown to himself, the regret that he had not gone with Bilbo was steadily growing. He found himself wondering at times, especially in the autumn, about the wild lands, and strange visions of mountains that he had never seen came into his dreams. He began to say to himself, 'Perhaps I shall cross the river myself one day,' to which the other half of his mind always replied, 'Not yet.'"
Do you think that's an effect of the ring too? The mountains that he's never seen before coming into his dreams?
I mean,
Because where else? Or is it just his imagination?
well, I'm sure he had heard about the Misty Mountains and such from Bilbo. It's possible that his conversations with the elves and dwarves that he had heard about these mountains.
Yeah.
And when you hear about things, sometimes it inspires, even if you've never seen them, it inspires certain visuals in your mind, and I can see it in kind of invading your dreams in that way, right?
Agreed.
Inspiring dreams in that way.
Agreed.
So, I don't know. There's certain things that we'll find as we go along, of this sort that affect Bilbo, where you're kind of like, is this just some trick of his mind, or is this something else that's kind of calling to him, right? And I don't know. Is this? I think in our mailbag episode, one of our listeners kind of suggested that the ring was putting thoughts, was kind of drawing Bilbo back towards the east, right? Because it wanted to make itself easier to be found by Sauron or Sauron's forces. That maybe, this is the ring again putting these things into his mind, but we don't know that. We don't know that for sure. I do think it's interesting that it says he had these. He was wondering these things, especially in autumn, and I was like, what is about autumn that makes one think that?
Well, the weather is usually very nice.
Yeah. Autumn is a more like, I think, sort of like thoughtful, pensive season.
Yeah, I agree, because you have it's a time of change, like a noticeable change, right, where the leaves are turning, and it's like winter is coming, but it's not here yet, and it's still, like summer, like the air is still more summery, but it's not as hot.
Yeah.
It's just a good, like, kind of transitional time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I one of those little details that you probably skip over, but I just think it's interesting that Tolkien notes that he was thinking about these things in autumn. So, I loved the bit about, that comes a little later. It says he looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders. That made me think of this map, which is from Lord of the Rings. It's a map of the Shire that was drawn by Christopher, and I think this is kind of a perfect example of that, right? So you have kind of a general map of the Shire. It says a part of the Shire up here because the Shire extends a little bit beyond this, but even here, it ends right at the edges. It doesn't go all the way to the edges. It's just kind of white space beyond kind of the main portion of the Shire here. And like, to me, this whole idea of mostly white spaces beyond its borders, it's kind of like, for most hobbits that live in the Shire, they would think to themselves, like, why would I care about anything beyond the borders of the Shire, right? Why would that even cross my mind? It might as well be white space to me. But Frodo, wondering what lay in those white spaces, it sort of signifies that same sort of wanderlust, right? That idea that, like, he wants to know. He's not content with what most hobbits are content with at this point.
Yeah.
There's something in him that wants to go beyond the Shire. As much as he loves the Shire, he wants to go beyond it and see what lay beyond it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't help but think that this was somehow inspired, or like, just Bilbo's disappearance has kind of encouraged this a little bit, because he obviously was very close to Bilbo and very much respected him, and he's like, well, if Bilbo left, there must be something pretty great out there. Yeah. Right? So,
and if Bilbo hasn't come back after all this time.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Then he must have found something, worth going to.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Just that curiosity and maybe in a way wanting to follow in Bilbo's footsteps. I mean, he's already following in his footsteps, it says, like, based on his, as far as the oddities go. So maybe he's just, just wants to keep that going.
You know what? I just had a thought. So, you think about it, like Bilbo.
Your screen is visible?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I meant for it to be visible.
Oh, interesting.
Bilbo, in The Hobbit, he would have been, so the quest of Erebor takes place in 2941. So Bilbo would have been 51. So that's really interesting that Frodo is starting to feel this way as he approaches the age of 50. Because perhaps he understands that Bilbo, it's in his mind that, like, Bilbo, when he was 50 or 51, and actually depending on when his birthday was, September. It might have been, yeah. So I think he was so 22nd September. When did he leave on the quest of Erebor? He left. Let's see. He left when he was still 50. So Bilbo leaves on his journey before his birthday in 2941. He leaves with the dwarves.
Well, even in the text it says that Frodo considers the age of 50 as kind of ominous.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is that why, right? It's like Bilbo had his great adventures started having his great adventures when he was 50.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Frodo at this point has no inkling that he's going to, right? Or does he? Like, does he feel like he has to, or it's like his destiny? There's something seems to be something embedded in his mind and his psychology that says, like, Bilbo was doing this at 50. Yeah. Therefore, I should be doing this at 50.
Possibly. Yeah, it very well could be. Also, speaking of the autumn, obviously, Bilbo left in September, toward the end of September, which is, by all intents and purposes, autumn time, right?
It's right at the change of the season.
It's maybe not technically fall yet, because I feel like first day of fall. No, I think it is actually the first official day of fall as far as the calendar goes. I think it's in September, isn't it? Isn't it like later? Is it the
equinox?
Yeah. When is that typically? Stop it.
There you go.
Stop it. Bilbo's birthday. What the heck? Okay.
I'm not sure if it's that date every single year, but
it
this
just
year
happens to be this year. That's really cool.
It may be every year too.
Probably not.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know how it's determined.
It's pretty close. It's pretty close.
So anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we may have just answered our questions.
Boom.
Yep. Look at us.
Awesome. So it's kind of all coming together now. Why he's feeling this way. Yeah. This is why we do the do not be hasty method here, folks.
All the pieces are falling into place.
So Frodo, as he approaches, it feels significant or ominous, maybe because he knows that this was when Bilbo went off on his great journey, right? And it was a big turning point in Bilbo's life. So is Frodo approaching a big turning point in his life? That's the question.
Yeah.
So, and just another note on, maps and their borders. I mean, I can understand what Frodo is all about here, because I'm the type of person who looks at maps and wonders about things, right? Not necessarily the white spaces beyond the borders, although I would, right? If it was all I knew of a map, I would wonder, like, what lies beyond it. But also just, like, I love looking at, like, Google Maps and, like, all the places in the world that, like, I'll never go, right? Or, like, nobody lives, right? But it's a place in the world, right? It's a place on this planet right now that, like, most people will never visit. Really interesting ones are, like, really remote, like, islands out in the middle of the sea, like, where, only a few people live. And it, like, you can't even get there by plane because there's no landing strip. You have to go by boat, like, a couple days journey. Those are fascinating kinds of places to me.
For sure.
All these sorts of remote locations. And we also learned that during this period, strange wayfarers began to appear in the Shire. we don't really learn much more about who those strange wayfarers were at this point, though we have an inkling that it was like, elves and dwarves and that kind of thing. And then we heard there were tidings of the outside world. Elves headed westward through the Shire. Dwarves on the road in unusual numbers, some seeking refuge in the west. They spoke of Mordor and the enemy. Mordor is really a name that was only known in the Shire from legends of the dark past. So, you kind of think to yourself, it must have been a very strange thing for the hobbits that heard Mordor brought up. Like, Mordor, it's almost not even like a real thing, like, is that even a real place, so far away? Frodo, it's mentioned here, about the White Council. Let me find this here. So, it seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council, only to reappear in greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. So this is going back to things that were going on during The Hobbit, right? During the adventure, the quest of Erebor, and during The Hobbit. So I wanted to read this little note from our Reader's Companion about the White Council here. So pull this up here. All right. So, White Council. In The Hobbit, chapter 19, it is revealed that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. In the first and second editions of The Hobbit, Gandalf says of this that the North is freed from that horror for many long years, I hope. But as revised in 1966 with the events of The Lord of the Rings in mind, he says instead that the North will be freed from the horror for many long years, I hope. In Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, it is said that when, after a time of watchful peace, the shadow of evil fell upon Mirkwood, in that time was first made the Council of the Wise that is called the White Council, and therein were Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan and other lords of the Eldar, and with them were Mithrandir, Gandalf, and Curanir, Saruman. So, when he refers to the White Council here, that's what's being referred to as that White Council of the wizards and of Galadriel and Elrond and others who had driven Sauron out of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. But Sauron was driven back to Mordor, and the Dark Tower, Barad-dûr, was rebuilt. It is said that the Dark Tower had been rebuilt. From there, the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south, there were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. So these weren't the trolls. These aren't the trolls that Bilbo had met early in The Hobbit. These were stone. Yeah, these were smart trolls, cunning, armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all these, but they had no name. Yeah. So.
Wow.
All right. Well, Greta.
A lot of strange happenings.
Absolutely. What did I miss? What did I miss
in
our discussion of this section? Anything important?
Do you think the elves are heading toward the Grey Havens? Is that where they're going?
Yes, that's that. If they're traveling west, they're traveling to the Grey Havens in order to make the journey back to the Blessed Realm.
So it's almost like there's a little bit of an evacuation going on. It sounds like.
It almost feels like that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of the elves hear about they've been living in Middle Earth for a long time, but they hear that Mordor and Mordor is on the rise, and they're like, I think it's time for me to leave. Right. Yeah. Nothing left for me in Middle Earth.
Right.
And it is kind of disappointing to think that might be the case instead of being like, whoa, we have to stay here and help Middle Earth, right? That many of them are like, well, I guess it's time for me to be leaving.
Yeah, that's true.
So you would think most elves would have a better mindset than that, but I think we're mostly exposed to elves that are heroic types of elves normally, and not necessarily, the elves that maybe aren't the heroes. Right. Sure, there are some.
Yeah. Yeah. That absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
A great question.
Yeah, I think that's good.
All right.
You got it all.
Well, 17 years travels fast, doesn't it? On our next episode, we'll get to spend some time with Sam and learn of his fascination with elves and dragons and other matters of no concern for respectable hobbits. Make sure to join us. All right. Greta, tell them how they can support us.
Oh, yeah. Well, first, you can join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Second, if you're watching, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on.
Right on. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point with Don't Be Hasty. We'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. We can't promise you that it will be read on air, but we'll do our best, and some correspondence most certainly will.
Don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, Two Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R.,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Melkor 27,
SaberSystems,
Jeremy D,
Emilio P,
Jonathan D,
Richard K,
Paul D,
Julia,
Werty,
Chris B,
2or91,
Carolyn S,
Emiel K,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R,
Matthew W,
Daniel D,
Harrison C,
Jason C,
Seb M,
Wilbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S,
Brian O. I,
Zeke F,
James L,
Chris L,
Aja V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack.
Eric B.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.